So we want to start out by just giving an overview of why we felt it was so important to explore the experiences of Black women in physics graduate programs. Statistically, we have over 2,000 physics PhDs are awarded each year in the United States, but less than 0.5 of those are given to women of African descent. Many of these women report initiating maybe a program, a graduate program in physics, but they are often forced out or pushed out, encouraged to what we call master out these programs before completing their PhDs. And then, most importantly, we just feel that Black women should be able to pursue a graduate degree in physics and also maintain their well-being in environments that are inclusive and affirming. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to a co-researcher, Dr. Trenton Marsh, who's going to give you a little bit of information about the photo voice method that was used to conduct this study.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. So just to kind of give a little bit of insight, so I think it's important to note that photo voice originally started in 1992, but when it was originally used, it was actually seen as almost a tag on of a larger macro mixed method study. So it was used in the rural China, but Wang and Burris actually saw it as like the surveys were they're going to be the primary data collection, and then they said, let's since we're out in the field, let's just go ahead and do this thing called photo voice. But what they realized is that it was the pictures, the narratives that were adjoined to those pictures that really moved the policymakers in that rural province of China. And so, just definitionally speaking, as you see here, entrusting research participants. So, in this context, we're talking about our co-researchers were these women who identified as either getting their PhDs in physics, have been mastered out, or were currently in their program. But giving them cameras, but in this context, their phones, and allowing them and encouraging them to document their landscape, specifically as it relates to their journey in their PhD programs in physics. I think it's really important also to highlight here the aims because we leverage photo voice as a sort of a collective assessment tool. And so when we think about the aims therein, you have reflection of the record and aspects of their own experience. So this is really important because, right, these are individuals who are in programs, again, whether mastered out, currently in programs, have already graduated, and allowing them to record their aspects of their own experience and with their words, leveraging their images. And number two aim, critical dialogue. So not only were they dialoguing with the co-PIs as it relates to semi-structured interviews around the pictures, then they also had the opportunity to dialogue at a collective level with the other individuals in focus groups. And then the third piece of the aim, and I'll kind of put a pin here and then move to the next slide, is that in photo voice, the essence is the last portion, and the last portion is a community social action event or orientation. In this context, right, we're leveraging the webinar. But really, it's an opportunity for folks to see people's lived experiences again through images and conversation with those narratives to not only educate, but agitate, disrupt notions, perspectives, right? But at the end of the day, to influence policy. Next slide. And so when we think about the data collection analysis, so it took roughly 3 months, 3.5, 4 months to get our institutional review board process going. And after those 4 months, then we were actually able to do a national call across the nation concerning who was interested in this study. Now we had three criterion, at least 18, actually four criterion, at least 18 or above, identified as Black, identified as a woman, and then were either currently in a PhD program, had mastered out of a PhD program, or had graduated from the PhD program. So the ideal population, we landed with 13 individuals. And as you see here are some of the demographics. So we had three who attended HBCUs as undergrads. We had 10 of these individuals who were in an actual APS bridge program. Two had mastered out, and then 11 currently were in their PhD programs. So we have, again, 13 photo voice participants. What's really important here is the onboarding process that we did. So we had two onboarding opportunities for the participants over the summer. of 2023. And it's really important to just to kind of highlight some of the things we covered in that onboarding. So the ethics of taking pictures, the photo voice, the history of photo voice, really the origins of photo voice. We also covered some scenarios, some role playing, things maybe to think about considerations concerning legal, things that you maybe shouldn't take pictures of, even if it is tied to your journey. So again, we wanted to kind of give them a robust understanding of the project, even the procedures from taking the photos all the way up to today for the webinar, all of those things therein. So individuals had roughly I think we had 4 or 5 weeks with their phones, and we gave them the prompt, as you see the prompt on the side here. As someone who identifies as a Black woman, take pictures of how you would describe your journey towards a graduate degree in physics. So this is the prompt that they used, and they take pictures. Now, what's really interesting is that when we gathered the photos back, so again, they took the pictures, they uploaded in a cloud-based secured server. With every picture, there was a required creation of the narrative. So again, why that picture was taken at that particular moment, as well as the title of the image. So when we got back with them, whether we typically it was two co-PIs for every individual interview. But when we got back with them, those narratives just gave us a little bit of understanding of why those images were taken. But what we leveraged, however, as you see here on the semi-structured interviews, we leveraged the showed approach, which really is a mnemonic that was originally done and from 1983. We're kind of some of the what Wang and Burst would sort of articulate as sort of the traditional way to engage when folks have taken images. Now, when we advise our advisory board, or when we connect with our advisory board concerning this particular question that we would like to pursue and asking our participants, they kind of gave us some tweaks. So I just want to really quickly read some of the tweaks as it relates to these semi-structured interviews. So the first two questions were the same. So what do you see here and what is really happening here? Like those two questions were the same, but then we specifically tailored our question for our participants. So number three became, regardless of your current status, does this relate to Black women in a physics graduate program? The fourth question was modified to, why does this need to be captured for your journey? The fifth question was modified to, based on your journey and these images, what could you share with other Black women who are interested in pursuing graduate degrees in physics? And then finally, number six, it was changed to, based on your journey and your images, what are your recommendations for positive changes in policy and practice and grad physics programs? So as you see here, we ask them questions not only based on, if you will, the research side of things, but we're also interested in the dissemination. And so that's why it's really important, as you see here, it's called the showed plus approach, because it's specifically, we wanted them to also give us some understanding and their feedback about recommendations for dissemination. And just really quickly, we asked them questions around who they thought were the power brokers who can make some changes, the best ways to make changes, and also asking them what were the best modes to present data, right? The modes to present the data and the revelations based upon their experiences. And so that's really what this afternoon is about, giving amplification of voices based upon images, leveraging their images alone. And so everything that you see moving forward, it's going to be, I like to say, it starts and stops with their images. So let's go to the next slide, please. So today we're going to be sharing with you all 4 themes. Okay, 4 themes that we saw across the 13 participants. And now every individual photo that we're going to show you initially is one picture that again cuts across all the individuals. And it's really important here to articulate that we want you to participate with us as we share you these photos. So we're going to have some instructions on each slide, and I want you to follow through those instructions, and then we'll move forward. So next slide, please. So this is theme number 1. So please take a moment to reflect on this photo and then ask yourself what might be the connection between this photo and a Black woman's journey in her physics PhD program. So let's just give you about 30 seconds. About 10 more seconds. Okay, next slide. So again, continue to engage and share. So the theme, the meta theme, is mental health and well-being. This particular photo was titled "Grief." Okay, and here's the quotation, and you can focus in certainly on the bold areas, but I'm just going to read. So this is a time to kind of mourn the graduate experience that I wanted to have. I was hoping I could be comfortable in asking questions and being myself and not have to worry so much about all of the isms. It's the kind of that's prevalent, like all the racism and the prejudices that happen time and time again in this particular physics PhD program. Then later in a focus group, this individual said that all of the tombstones are a portion of me that is grieving, something being piled on top of the grief. Now, it's important to highlight is that this particular individual lost two individuals at the start of her PhD program. And so this wasn't just physical grief, but it was obviously an experiential grief. Multiple things that are constantly having to pass, grieving someone to pass, grieving friendships, grieving family, funding, the opportunity to be one's most authentic self, but not able to do that in the context of this program. And then later there was a conversation in our focus group when we got together. And again, and so with the focus groups, individuals came with their top photos, shared that photo, and then the other individuals shared what they also saw in the image. And so what sort of rose to the top of this particular photo was that even when you have an opportunity, or I should say, even when there's an instance where it should require grieving, right? A loss of a loved one, right? A loss of something. But because of their experience in the context of these programs, they didn't have time for the grief. They had to compartmentalize it because of the lab that was coming up, right? Because of the next assignment, because of the qualifying exam. And so what rose to the top was, and this is the quotation of the group, "We are living ghosts." Next slide. And so we wanted to also share not only the singular photo that represented for the whole group, but we also wanted to share you nuances of other photos from other participants. So these are, again, we're not going to go over each one just in the interest of time, but these are the titles of pictures the folks took. Again, individuals in the program, overloading the wagon. This idea of carrying weight, carrying the burdens of multiple things, having to work while you're in your PhD program, having to be a caretaker while you're in your PhD program, being isolated while you're in your PhD program, right? Back to journaling, this idea of it being a soul searching opportunity to capture these things. And then Mama Isa being somebody's pet to kind of get them through feeling isolated in the context of the PhD program. And the next theme.
So following up from where Dr. Marsh stopped, I will continue with the second theme that we came up with. So I will let you take a moment to reflect on this photo. And like the prompt says, what might be the connection between this photo and a Black woman's journey in her physics program? Okay, let's move into what the participant identified this theme as on the next slide. As we continue to discuss what this image might mean, our participants indicated that this shows their interaction with faculty. And interaction with faculty is so important because these are important bodies of their academic journey. So important individuals that will shape their academic journey. And the quote here says, "My department was extremely cold. I didn't feel very welcome to walk into any professor's office. There was nobody who I would sit and be like, if some crisis was happening, I'll be like so and walk into so and so's office." And later, the participant said, "So I feel like being able to create the environment that I did not have in my department, a warm, inviting, loving environment where you feel cared for by the adult in the room, where you feel like this is somewhere I can go just to feel like I'm safe. I could go talk to Miss E if something's happening." This was the picture that the participant painted based on their experience and titled it "My Safe Place" because their interaction with not just their department but their faculty seemed cold. As we go deeper into this theme, we found out that we had both positive and negative experiences, and this impacted the journey of our participants. So the previous slide highlighted the negative experiences that our participants had based on the coldness they felt in their department and their inability to have anyone to talk to through their academic journey. On the positive side, the participants highlighted that interaction with faculty creates a sense of belongingness, a subjective feeling of value and respect derived from a reciprocal relationship to an external referent that is built on a foundation of shared experiences, beliefs, or personal characteristics. And this is something that we have seen also in literature, the importance of having positive relationship, positive interaction with faculty, and the impact that this might have on the learning process and the academic journey of our participants. Without positive or helpful, meaningful interaction with faculty, we saw that participants had to encounter, or part of their experience included, doubt, because you don't have anyone to talk to, or they didn't have anyone to interact with about problems they were facing in their department, or anyone that they could trust with this information about their feeling, or maybe even standing in that mentorship position. Participants feel had experiences that brought about that. More experiences included resilience, books, a million, because now they had to also compensate for their lack of positive interaction with their faculty. And needing that sense of belongingness, they had to find their own environment or create their own environment in the school. I will highlight resilience as an example because I know some of my students are here. We talk about diamond under pressure, but this also still highlights some effort that diamonds go through to get to the end result that we see. And most times it is not always a smooth process. Over to the next slide.
El Tipo Verituno, thank you. So again, we will engage in our reflective process. Our third theme is represented by this photo, and I will give you about 30 minutes to think about what might be the connection between this photo and a Black woman's journey in her physics PhD program. A lot of great ideas coming through in the chat. a lot related to the painful experience of going to the dentist matched with the painful experience of going to grad school, and then some really close with what our participant was representing with this photo. So she labeled this photo the dentist office. And this is related to our meta theme of finances and how finances impact being in graduate school for our participants, as well as how being in graduate school impacted our participants' finances. So this participant explained, I remember avoiding going to the dentist's office when I was in grad school. There's always like a new bill that I couldn't afford. And so it made me think of, it's like you have like your basic needs met in grad school, but you really can't afford for anything to go wrong because you can't afford it monetarily. So it was always like better to avoid going to the dentist than having to pay a lot of money because you have a cavity or something. So a lot of you hit on that and your connections in the chat with not fully supporting folks while they are in graduate school. This theme of finances came up in a lot of different venues for our participants. So on this screen, we see some of the slides that we also categorized to align with this theme. On the left, we have, did I make the wrong choice? And this is a photo of a presentation talking about the cost of rent in that participant's, the town that their graduate program was in, how much the rent had risen, and how, and the participant reflected on how even if at the beginning of a program, you had been able to make finances work, that status may have changed significantly in the past couple of years. So just being able to afford safe and comfortable housing, that comes into play on our second photo also, which was titled Windows. Finances impacted this participant's experience in graduate school in a number of ways. They weren't able to afford to fly out to the program ahead of starting the program in order to try to check out what the apartment situations might be like. So they had to rent an apartment sight unseen. They ended up in an apartment originally that didn't have any windows at all, which they thought was not the best, but they could make it work by being outside. And then COVID hit. So our participant was basically trapped in a windowless apartment for the beginning of her physics graduate program. So this was representing later when she was able to look at apartments and actually choose one that had windows. And then our third photo on the right, we see a banana and an avocado and some flax muffins. And our participant titled this photo Snacks for Health. And she talked about how she had recently changed her physics program. She'd originally been in a physics bridge program. She had been accepted into the astronomy track at a specific university, and the astronomy students, we heard a couple times, tend to make more money. And so making this new level of money allowed the participant to buy food that she thought would actually be healthy and nourishing to her body compared to food that she was able to afford on her prior assistantship level. This participant also discussed having to initially live very far from campus in order to find rent that met within her assistantship level. We had other participants talk about starting gardens to try to make vegetables because they couldn't afford vegetables on their assistantship support. And so the amount of stipend came out frequently, it came up frequently for these participants in really basic life necessities of providing safe housing, having healthy food to eat, and being able to take care of their healthcare needs. They often felt like the program expected that they had more financial resources within their family to rely on. So they talked about other folks having family finances to go check out apartments ahead of time, to send them money monthly for food, and that really isn't the case for all participants, and that it's not okay for programs to assume that they're being supplemented by their family. Now I'll turn it over to Camille for our fourth theme.
Hello. Yes, of course, I'm having a little issues with my clicker, but we're down to the fourth theme. And again, I'm going to ask you, similarly to the other researchers, to view the image on the slide and then take a moment to reflect on the photo. And if you could please continue to post in the chat what you think the connection might be between this photo and a Black woman's journey in her physics PhD program. And if you can't see clearly, the right side of her hair is braided, and then the other side is in an afro. Okay, so I see a few comments. She's unraveling, code switching, not fully being seen by others, and torn between differing perspectives. So this one was really interesting, and many of you got very close. I'm going to read the quote and then we'll just talk a bit about it. This last theme is microaggressions. And so in this particular photo, which she labeled taking out braids, she was discussing how she has really long, thick black hair. And she recalled the first day or like the first week of being in the new graduate program that they were taking a group photo. And there were lots of comments behind her related to her hair being so big and how it was covering up their faces. And of course, this wasn't the greatest introduction to her to the program, leading perhaps to a little insecurity about wearing out her natural hair. But additionally, she talks a little bit more about how in her research area, there's a clean room. And in this clean room, they have to wear hats, a little cap over their heads. Unfortunately for her, when she is preparing to go into this clean room, she will often have to braid her hair because her natural hair will not fit under the cap. And so one of the things that was really prominent about the discussion that she shared with the interviewer in regards to this cap for the clean room is that she noted that as she had begun her graduate physics program, she often felt as if it had not been a place that was prepared for a Black woman. In particular, for example, in her clean room, there had been no forethought of if a Black woman were to come into this area and maybe, want to wear her natural hair, there needed to be larger caps, equipment for her to wear. And so the resounding theme as we entered out of that conversation was just that she felt that perhaps this was something she should have expected, because oftentimes people do not expect Black women to be in these spaces. And when they were creating and developing a lot of these labs, no one ever thought that a Black woman physicist would be there and working. So there was not forethought to think to make things a little bit more accommodating for different people. Next slide. And these are just a few I'll run through quickly because we're quick to get some questions and answers for you. But these are some other slides. The first slide is combined. In this slide, the participant was expressing how she felt as if people expected her to leave her Blackness and womanness behind. In other words, why can't you just be a researcher? Why do you even have to focus on being Black or being a woman? And so in that way, it created this kind of confinement for her where she felt that the expectation for her was not to be able to show up as her authentic self. And to answer the question for people, she said, who would ask, why do you have to focus on being Black and a woman? Why can't you just focus on being a researcher or a physicist? She would love to. However, when she was talking about when she's walking around campus, she has fears that she'll be stopped by campus police. On campus to different buildings, she's often asked, why are you here? Will her ID be checked? She has to be concerned about because she doesn't fit into the environment. And oftentimes people assume that she doesn't belong. The second picture, Sneakers on Deck, is a participant who initially showed the picture and just talked about how she would wear the sneakers into the lab to kind of fit in with everybody else, even though her style is much more fashionable. Sometimes she has to wear the sneakers to fit in and to avoid too much attention. But even more specifically, we noted that the strings on the sneakers, and I don't know if you guys have noticed that as well, are triple tied. And so she also went to state that she makes sure to tie her sneakers very tightly because she can't afford to have any accidents or make any mistakes in the lab. There's already enough scrutiny on her as being the only Black woman in the lab. And so she just has a lot of fear about making mistakes because she feels, as the only Black woman in her program, she is not allowed to make mistakes. And the last picture is a day in the office. This participant was new at a summer research program, and the gentleman on the right, which you can barely see, he was assisting her on her desktop, unasked, of course, but they were both new to the program. But she found it interesting that, as usual, he kind of made the assumption that he knew a little bit more than her, even though they were probably at about the same pace because they were both new to the program. And so she was just speaking about if she wondered if there would ever be a day where people would not see her as a Black woman in the physics program and assume that she is in any way less knowledgeable or less capable than her peers. Next slide. And so to wrap it up, we're going to do recommendations, and I do see a hand raised. We're going to have time for Q&A. So some of the recommendations, and we will have more information on this after the webinar, are to increase training and awareness to faculty and advisors, anybody who will be working directly with these Black women or the people of color in these physics programs, understanding that there are cultural differences that sometimes can cause communication issues or just can sometimes cause the participants to feel even more isolated. So we felt that it'd be very important to allow for some specialized training to understand the unique challenges that Black women face in STEM fields. And this type of training can include things like cultural competency and just awareness of the systematic barriers. The second recommendation is academic support. Many of them expressed a desire to see some reform in qualifying exams for physics programs. Many of them reported needing additional tutoring support that they did not receive. It's important to understand that a lot of times these women are not invited to the study groups. They're not going to be a part of the group of graduate students who are working together and getting work done. So there is often a time for them to receive where they will need additional academic support to just even stay on par with their peers. And then there's mental health support that's much needed. A lot of the women express difficulties in finding mental health support on their campus due to either not being able to schedule regular appointments, not feeling as if the counselors had a deeper understanding of what it meant to be a Black woman in physics programs. So that's an area where they could definitely use much more support. Policy and advocacy, we recommend that institutions implement policies and promote diversity and inclusion to ensure that Black women have equal opportunities to participate in fellowships, research opportunities, and assistantships. Just a quick note on that, often it's about who you know or if you're in the know. And because Black women are typically the only or one of very few Black women in their programs, they are often not aware of opportunities that exist for summer research programs, fellowship, assistantships. So just making sure that there is a way for them to obtain the knowledge and information to participate in these things as well. Community building, we're just asking that as women come into your program, that if there are not spaces that are created for them to be able to connect with other Black women, that you would either recommend spaces in the community or organizations that you know of where they can connect with other Black women, because that's very important during their journey to be able to have that support with people who understand their experience. Healthcare assistants, we covered a little bit with the financial theme. Many of them reported having issues with obtaining appropriate medical and healthcare. So if every participant could be afforded the opportunity to have affordable healthcare, which also includes, that's what I'm trying to remember very clearly, is they talked a lot about not having dental and vision care, and that was one of the recommendations that they had as well. And that all helps with the well-being. And then widening perspectives on graduate students' roles and responsibilities. That's the last recommendation, but for me, it's probably one of the most important because people tend to center the traditional physics graduate student. And when anybody who comes in who's much different from that, which Black women have both the I was going to say the identity of being Black and a woman, which leaves them in a doubly marginalized state. They're not going to come into the programs with the same level of responsibilities, the same characteristics, the same roles that they play in their families as traditional physics graduate students would possibly have. So it's important when working with Black women to broaden your perspective and think about the different challenges and barriers they may face that may be unique from other students. Next slide, please. Okay, and so we're going to just show this very last picture because it was very representative of what a lot of the women stated in their interviews. And in this picture, the participant intentionally posed in this empty lecture hall, intentionally showed the lighting and the shadow in the back with the light toward the front to show this invisible hypervisibility duality that exists among Black women in physics programs, where often if they do something wrong or if they make a mistake or they're not passing their exams, they're highlighted. But other than that, typically they're invisible and people, will tend to not even notice what's going on with them. And so also in this picture, the one thing that the participant stated is that it kind of represented her waiting here in this empty lecture hall for the next Black woman to come and join her. Next slide, please. And so we thank you all so much for patiently waiting initially and also sitting through the presentation. At this time, if you have any questions, you could go ahead and type in your questions and we will try to answer most of those as we can. We also have a QR code where you can also scan, and if you are not able to get in your question today, you can scan that and contact us, and one of the researchers will get back to you with an answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Camille. And we are getting quite a few questions in the Q&A. Keep putting those in and folks will try to respond to some in text if that works, or in which case your question will move to the answered tab, or we may be able to bring some of those to the panel here. So I will start with a question from Dr. Laura McCullough, who asked, was there a stronger sense of the participants' narratives being either positive or negative? Did the participants focus more on strengths or barriers? And I will ask Camille and Atunu if you could speak to that question for us.
So the first part of the question, I believe, was did they
Was there a stronger sense of the participants' narratives being either positive or negative as they were describing their journeys in their physics program?
I would say overall positive because of the fact that these women presented such tenacity and perseverance in their programs. Now, as far as their individual experiences or collective experiences, the data does show that, unfortunately, they had predominantly negative experiences, but I'd like to end it on a positive note because of the ways in which they were able to handle those experiences and the lessons, most importantly, that they learned from those experiences in some way made it positive.
I think a related question is, did the participants talk about their experiences finding advisors and if they were given projects that their advisors were invested in through an active grant? And that came from an anonymous attendee.
If I will respond to that, the participant highlighted that, yes, they had both positive and negative experiences finding advisors. Some of them already came into the program with a PI in charge of their research. However, the experiences along the line were not possibly the best, but yes, they shared about their experience finding advisors, and some were already posted with projects ahead of time that their PIs were already working in, and it was a new learning experience for them. I hope that answered the question.
I'll just add that many of them now did report having some difficulty initially finding an advisor. And then we did have at least a couple whom their advisors were probably the conduit for them making the decision to exit their programs, just due to lack of support or not being as positive in their comments and feedback as we would like for them to have been.
We have a couple of questions about like about the participant pool. So Sharon asks where socioeconomic information obtained from the women. Were they from different Black ethnic groups or nationals? Camille, can you speak to that?
We did not give any economic information, nor very much about their cultural backgrounds. The call for participants, we simply asked for them to identify as a Black woman in a physics PhD program. We focus more on their institutions, the type of undergraduate institutions they went to, and the type of institutions that they're currently attending.
Gerald Epstein asks, is there a risk that paying special attention to Black women graduate students to make sure that they feel welcomed and are not left to their own devices and feeling abandoned could backfire, and that they might perceive those efforts as implying they were less capable of succeeding or even less qualified?
Great question. I'd just like to start out by saying, I don't think that the recommendation is necessarily asking for special treatment. I think the recommendation that we are giving is to mainly be recognized and be aware that your Black women coming into your program will have unique challenges, that they will present different responsibilities. For example, a lot of the women in the program, I think almost all of them, held part-time jobs. For some advisors at certain departments, holding a part-time job while also trying to do research is frowned upon. And so the recommendation is, for example, in situations like that, instead of just initially thinking things like maybe this woman isn't that serious about her career, maybe she's kind of just trying to juggle too much, understanding that there may be some financial obligations, some family obligations. Many of them are caregivers that have to be taken care of. So just to conclude, I understand your concern, but I think it's not as much about putting a highlight on Black women in terms of, oh, they need to be taken care of or treated in a special way. It's just that they need to be listened to. So asking questions, finding out what you can do to support the women in your program, and also just being understood and understanding that, they will not always be able to do or, be at the same level or be at the same place, socially or whatever, as other students. There are differences.
If I may add,
Please, go
sorry,
ahead.
Jackie,
No,
just
you
a
go ahead.
little, looking at the background of the demographics of our participants, majority of them were in predominantly white institutions and Hispanic serving institutions. So that's already an environment that is not one that's culturally familiar with the students. And so requesting for additional support and understanding the importance of recognizing diversity and providing accommodations to those individuals is not, I would say victimizing, but in such a way that is empowering them to make them recognize that, okay, we see you, some of your needs might be different from our traditional students, and we can provide those services that you need to excel.
I was gonna share that I don't know that we need to, I mean, we could, and there are ways that we can supportively provide special attention to Black women graduate students, but I don't think everything our participants were asking for was wrapped up in special attention as much as just more of a diversity of the things that are offered. So one photo that we didn't share was one of our participants who was working a job, and she had an orientation for her job where they provided lunch via bringing a whole bunch of different food trucks representing different ethnicities of foods. And she contrasted that with the standard in physics where she'd only ever been offered pizza. And so just thinking about how, and this came up a couple of times, participants talked about having salt shakers on their desks for the food, right? So I think just even being thoughtful and varying the food that we offer shows just a climate of care. I'm at a new university this semester, and our colloquium snacks vary from week to week. And it's like somebody thinks about what they're going to offer us this week and that it's different than last week. So I think there's these small tweaks we can make in our departments to show thoughtfulness and to show care that more match the way our participant prepared her classroom for students to show the care that she was hoping to get. Sorry, I'm trying to pick another question. Thomas Holly asks, the stresses experienced by the participants are clear. How can we separate the generic stresses experienced by all physics graduate students from those stresses that are specific to Black women graduate students?
Based on the experience of the Black women in physics program, this study was centered to Black women graduate students in physics. However, if we hope to dive into a more comparative study in the future, I think that's something that we'll consider to look at how these experiences differ from each other. But for this study, it was specific to the Black woman's experience.
Yeah, that's a good response, Atunu. I think, you know, if we were to do a comparison, we would definitely have the same prompt, obviously change it, not focusing on centering on Black women, but allowing folks to understand what their journeys looks like specifically for the intersectional, whatever it's a white woman, East Asian woman, whatever the case may be, we would open it up specifically for that subset.
And just in the question, just comparing, if I got it right, how does it differ from any other graduate student stress? It just primarily differs because obviously, as we talked about in the pictures, many of these women are very isolated in their programs. So the stress of being one and the only one or one of very few people in your entire program or your department who looks like you, who's familiar with your tradition and your culture is going to be just a unique stress in and of itself, being that you're, already, looking and feeling different versus a regular graduate student who perhaps has one of many people around them that looks like them and has similarities with them. So just, before anything else, I would just say the stress that's different for Black women is just the fact that they are pretty much the one or very few in their programs compared to other students who have other people that they can connect with and who they are familiar with.
So I'm going to put two questions together as our last question as we hit 4 o'clock, and then we may be able to stay around a little after. So those were, did the participants talk about how their experiences as a graduate student compared to their experiences as an undergraduate student? Were their grad students' experiences worse or the same? And also, are there any resources folks would suggest that participants in the webinar here could share with their colleagues and departments.
Well, let me address the last question. So we are in the works of creating an online presence, online resource that will incorporate more photos, more narratives, more recommendations, more sort of nuanced recommendations. We're working on that. So I would say, you know, just if you're interested in that, send us an email, go to the QR code and give us that information, and we will provide that for you at a later date. And what was the first top of the question, Jackie?
How participants' experiences as undergrads compared to their experiences as graduate students, with one worse than the other?
I will allow either Tunu or Camille to engage in that, but I do recall there was one participant who went to an HBCU as an undergrad, obviously. And in fact, thinking about that experience, they were actually comparing HBCUs, and one of the HBCUs that she went to versus or juxtaposed to another HBCU. She said her HBCU was actually more one that was focused in on acculturation and assimilation, as opposed to another HBCU in the Washington, D.C. area that was more known for advocacy and sort of pushing the norms. And she said it was this assimilating environment that kind of not necessarily prepared her for her PhD program, but it has allowed her to kind of be in a white space, still uncomfortable, still not being affirmed, still not being seen as her full agentic self. But that was sort of her understanding, at least from a HBCU context, thinking about her undergraduate experience. But Atunu and Camille, if you were able to give more insight there.
Yes, I can. Part of our question dug back to even the moment our participants were interested in pursuing a physics degree, so down to or back to high school. And for their undergraduate experience, if I can say this, it seemed to have been a little better than their graduate experience. However, we still have participants who are currently still in the graduate program, and that's why they can, you know, still share some of their experience ongoing. But yes, their experience in undergrad was a little less weighty than it is now in the graduate program.
I lied. We've got one more question we want to make sure to address. This one came in from Chris Louie. And she says, I feel like we're preaching to the choir with so many recommendations. How can we reach the more traditionally minded members of our community?
It begins with sharing the information with allies. That's what we call them in the physics community. To, like now, doing this webinar is already speaking to a lot of the traditionally minded members of the community, to let them know that these are some of the issues that their students are encountering, and these are some of the issues that's crippling their journey as graduate students, and these are ways that they can also address the issue to ensure that their students complete their program and become well-recognized professionals in the future. Also, part of the recommendations that we are sharing is one that will help other members of the physics communities to reflect on what roles they can play as members of that community to ensure that their students have better experience. So I think that's one way that we are doing it. So doing these webinars, we have another one coming up soon as well. So reaching out to members of the physics community, presenting at conferences, and also sharing links to this research so that they can know that there is a problem in that community and it should be addressed.
I think another thing that we can do is talk to our near peers, like the folks who are going to listen to us, right? So one of the things we asked our participants was who they thought were the allies that could help them make changes. And a lot of times they mentioned other Black women in physics, that they needed to band together to elevate concerns. They also mentioned white women in physics, that we were closer perhaps to the Black women and being able to empathize with their experiences, but maybe heard more in some of those department spaces. So we have a obligation to speak up when we see things happening, or we have the potential to influence power. And I think storytelling, the method that we're using here, is powerful. And so sharing those stories, making sure that we're sharing stories about participants who have succeeded, who've gone on to great things, about ways we've been able to provide access, about how important it was to bring food trucks one time, right? Because sometimes we're just not thinking about things. And just sharing the story of the impact that those had can help to make that practice something somebody's thinking about the next time. Trent and Camille, anything to add on to that?
Nothing on my end.
I would just reiterate the importance of the storytelling. I think traditionally speaking, across all spectrums, photo voice can be a leverage across disciplines. And if you have colleagues who are just sort of used to the traditional sort of empirical research, that's number centric, they might miss the mark. So once we're able to kind of share these stories, share these images, maybe go through the same process that we went through. Share an image and say, hey, what do you think about this image? And then obviously share the narrative therein. But I think to your point, Jackie, just sharing stories and allowing it not to stay in this space and go to conferences and to share with your colleagues.
And just to close what Dr. Marsh says concerning the methodology, the popular saying that we say beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder, the experiences of the participant lies in the lens of the participant. And yes, this is a research methodology that you can explore to get direct, both pictorial and verbal experiences of your research participants. And we are grateful for your attendance. Thank you for coming.